Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a fascinating and, honestly, deeply complex agricultural reform happening right now in northern Morocco. We're looking at a massive sweeping change that was supposed to bring traditional, marginalized farmers out of the shadows and plug them into a highly lucrative legal market. But, well, the reality on the ground is painting a much more complicated picture. So, let's uncover the central paradox of Morocco's green gold rush and figure out why the very people this reform was meant to save are actually finding themselves trapped. To really understand where we are today, we have to look back to a totally pivotal year, 2021. For decades, growing cannabis in Morocco was entirely illegal, but it was basically an open secret, harvested and sold regardless of the law. Then, in 2021, the Moroccan government made a huge, monumental decision. They decriminalized cannabis farming, specifically for pharmaceutical and industrial uses. The grand hope behind this legislation? To protect those traditional growers up in the impoverished Rif Mountains and finally integrate them into a safe, regulated global economy.
So, why this sudden intense interest from the international pharmaceutical industry? Well, it all comes down to cannabinoids. While the traditional black market always prioritized high THC yields, the stuff that alters perception and produces euphoria, European pharma giants are on the hunt for premium CBD, which is prized for its calming, anti-inflammatory, and really enormous therapeutic potential. This massive, untapped potential for medical extracts is exactly why European companies are suddenly so incredibly eager to buy up legally grown Moroccan crops.
That international demand created what a lot of people started calling the green gold promise, and the initial optimism was just absolutely sky high. Legalization was supposed to end the constant fear of arrests, wipe out the massive corruption of officials looking the other way, and open up this highly lucrative, legitimate international market for a region that has frankly been neglected for a long time. It sounded like a total win-win, right? At least on paper. International buyers get their high-quality CBD, and the farmers finally get stability and wealth.
But let's take a hard look at who is actually winning in this new legal market, especially in mountain hubs like Isagun. It is a tale of two extremes. On one side, you've got wealthy elite farms. We're talking politically connected operations with vast land holdings, extensive irrigation, and trained staff, often run remotely by owners kicking back in luxury villas in Tangier. And on the exact opposite side, you have the small-scale Rif Mountain farmers. They are historically impoverished, fighting severe drought with almost no water, burdened by deep debt, and relying on grueling, manual labor just to harvest their plants.
Looking at that stark divide, you might be wondering, and it's a very logical question, if the new legal system so heavily favors the wealthy elites and the mountain climate is so incredibly harsh, why don't these small-scale farmers just pivot? Why not grow something else entirely, like wheat or barley or vegetables?
The answer comes down to one massive multiplier: 10 times. Now, modern agricultural methods actually could allow other crops to grow in this region, despite the poor soil. But the hard truth is that cannabis yields roughly 10 times the income of any alternative crop. For these farmers, that 10x multiplier is definitely not a luxury. It is an absolute necessity for basic survival in a region that has virtually no other economic development, no industry jobs, and a severe lack of reliable infrastructure.
So the absolutely crucial point here is that this 10x income isn't a windfall. It's a high-stress economic trap. These farmers are locked into a 70-year family farming tradition. It is literally all they have ever known. They're battling a harsh climate and shrinking harvests because of severe drought. And on top of all that, they're being squeezed by middlemen who falsely claim the market is flooded just to artificially drive down prices. This forces the farmers to take out loans they can barely afford, trapping them in crushing, high-stress cycles of debt. They simply cannot afford to escape the cannabis trade, even if they desperately wanted to. Now, let's move on and see how this builds into the new legal framework. Because if you're thinking, hey, going legal should solve these financial problems, well, the reality is quite different. For the small traditional farmer, entering the legal market has introduced a whole new set of barriers that we can really only describe as a complete compliance nightmare. To grow legally, farmers have to navigate a rigorous, frankly exhausting process. Step 1, they have to join a licensed government cooperative. Step 2, they must submit highly specific topographical field data verified by strict state-run GPS. Step 3, their entire production chain has to meet incredibly stringent hygiene and contaminant standards demanded by those European pharma companies. And Step 4, this is the most devastating one, they have to deliver their harvest to the cooperative and then wait indefinitely for the product to be exported before they actually see a single dime.
The human toll of this bureaucracy is just heartbreaking. Listen to what one local farmer shared. They've sold their crops, but all they have is a receipt. They've been waiting for weeks and can't make ends meet. Just think about that. Compliance means handing over the only asset these farmers have. And while they wait for the slow international market to clear their goods, they are left holding a piece of paper, completely unable to buy basic, everyday necessities like cooking oil, sugar, winter clothes for their kids, or even life-saving medication.
To really grasp how this impacts the community on a micro level, we have to look inside the homes of the growers themselves. This fierce debate over whether to stay on the black market or take the huge risk of going legal has literally fractured households. A prime example is the El Morabit family, a household of 5 living right in the region. Their differing views on this reform perfectly mirror the broader struggle happening across the entire country.
Mohammed, the father of the family, made the risky choice to register his farm as a legal enterprise. Look, for 70 years, he lived with the reality of working in secret. His perspective is rooted in a desperate desire for peace. He asks, what's better, being constantly watched and being afraid, or having a decent life in peace without any pressure? He really represents that hopeful older generation. They are just exhausted by the paranoia of the black market, and they just want to operate safely in the open, even if the new system is flawed.
But his son, Nabil, he feels completely differently. Nabil is looking at those unpaid receipts, he's looking at his struggling neighbors, and he is feeling utter disillusionment. His perspective highlights this tragic gap between policy and reality. He says, "The law exists on paper, but where's the implementation? I need to find an alternative." For the younger generation, the ones actually doing the grueling manual labor out in the fields, the government's promises mean absolutely nothing if they can't actually feed their families or see a tangible financial return.
This generational clash is incredibly deep-rooted. In this traditional Muslim culture, the father holds total authority over the land decisions, meaning Nabil basically has no say in the farm's direction as long as his father is alive. Now, combine this intergenerational gridlock with the intense paranoia created by local police, who have a long history of encouraging neighbors to inform on one another, and the pressure becomes explosive. For young men like Nabil, waiting decades under their father's authority in a system that doesn't actually pay out, it isn't an option. Fleeing to Europe is increasingly seen as their only viable way to survive.
Which brings us to a really critical crossroads for the region. What happens when a policy designed to lift up a community ends up tearing its social fabric apart? As we look to the highly uncertain future of Morocco's cannabis trade, we really have to recognize the tragic, broader impact this transition is having on the entire legacy of the Rif Mountains.
Looking back over the last 70 years truly puts this cultural loss into perspective. Decades ago, despite the crop being totally illegal, there was deep community solidarity. If a farmer was in trouble, needed medicine, or suffered a death in the family, the community pooled their resources and helped out. Then came 2021. The sudden prospect of legal money and new seed varieties introduced fierce competition and deep distrust. Farmers began trying to acquire each other's land using money and political connections. And today, that old community spirit has severely eroded. It's been replaced by a broken community, living in a culture of silence, paranoia, and fear of informants.
Which leaves us with this profound, vital question. Will legalization ultimately save Morocco's legacy farmers, or just replace illegal cartels with a cartel of red tape? The government's intention to build a regulated pharmaceutical supply chain makes a lot of sense on paper, but the human cost being paid by the small-scale farmer, the person who is utterly trapped by the necessity of that 10x income, is immense. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope this gives you a new, closer perspective on the true price of the green gold rush and leaves you eager to learn more.